It came as a real surprise to me when I realized that despite good intentions, most of what I have written over the years in the Scrupulous Anonymous newsletter and in my book, Understanding Scrupulosity, is not very helpful. Let me be clear. There is some usefulness for those readers who desire to maintain their scrupulosity. The advice that I have offered makes it a little more comfortable, takes the edge off, perhaps even puts it into perspective. But that is about it. However, if you desire to do something more than maintain your scrupulosity, then little of what I have offered is of much use. If you desire to manage your scrupulosity, manage it to the point where you have some control over the obsession and the compulsion, some control over the repeating rituals, another path, another way must be chosen. Recently, in my newer writings and in spiritual direction, I've become much stronger and much more direct because I've come to realize the mistake that I was making. I felt compelled, in a good sense, to take the necessary steps to change it. I do not want you to maintain your scrupulosity. I want you to manage it. Manage it to the point where it's mostly just background noise and not the full symphonic orchestra. For me, the turning point and the change in perspective was when I confronted my understanding of sin. In the process of trying to understand sin, I was invited to come face to face with sin. I had to study the definitions of sin and seriously consider the human actions that I so casually labeled as sin because of the training that I have received. Also, because of the non-stop drumbeat about the ravages of sin and the destructive power of sin in the Christian story. A strong sense of sin was required in order to fully appreciate the selfless saving action of the incarnate Word, Jesus Christ. I had to understand the pervasiveness of sin in order to appreciate the meaning of what is meant to be redeemed and saved. The desire to understand sin, and in particular, not only to understand sin in the general sense, but to dig deep into sin and record every possible manifestation of sin, preoccupied the great theologians of the past. The entire systematic theological system, which took a single human thought or action and then pursued that thought or action down the path to the place where every possible meaning of the action or thought had been categorized, was a work that occupied these theologians for centuries. They were intent on identifying sin, rooting out sin, cataloging sin, and uncovering every possible nuance that could possibly be identified with human sinful action. Nothing escaped their categorization, and everything was weighed into balance, determining the sheer gravity and scope of what had been categorized. Venial, mortal, grave, serious, and everything in between became their points of measurement. Because of their untiring efforts, it became obvious to any reasonable person that the human race was steeped in sin. Thankfully, there was a remedy provided. A remedy that could not change the equation. The sin was omnipresent in the human condition from birth, but a remedy nonetheless. That remedy was to instruct each human person about the existence of sin, the all-pervasive presence of sin in every human action. The awareness of sin invited people to seek the remedy, to correct the obvious imbalance, a sacramental remedy of reconciliation. All well and good. But for the sacramental remedy to be effective, the individual sinner must pursue and root out the sin within them with the same diligence and the same perseverance with which the systematic theologians categorized it. Nothing was to be left to chance. And most certainly, nothing was recognized as sin should remain in secret. Every sin, including possible thoughts about sin, all should be brought into the light in order to be confirmed, judged, and then forgiven, with the small price to be paid of some kind of penance. It was a great system, and it worked very well, at least for some people. But at the same time, and this was and is a truth that is seldom if ever spoken of, it did not work for many people. The first group it did not work well for were the people who were not Christian, and in particular, not Catholic. They were steeped in sin, but had no realistic way out of their predicament. The second group were the baptized Catholics, who refused to accept their sin and to confess their sins. They were hardened sinners and downright nasty people, or so it seemed within the system, in order for it to make sense. The third group were those men and women who were engaged in some sort of human activity and experience that was just completely unacceptable to God. Some of whom were effectively barred from even seeking a sacramental remedy for their sin until everything that they were choosing was repudiated in advance and documented whenever possible. There were other groups for whom the process was not workable. In fact, more people for whom the system did not work than for those it did work. But that was never really part of the story, and certainly not part of the mythology about confession and Catholics. One group that the system completely failed are the people who are scrupulous, through no fault of their own, even though they often felt completely responsible for their scrupulosity. Scrupulous people are not hardened sinners, not in the least. They are people who truly love God and who are concerned about their relationship with God. But they are also people with some internal struggles. Their biggest struggle is anxiety, which has many causes and manifestations. A second issue is that this anxiety is often attached with the memory of some sort of trauma, particularly trauma about intrusive thoughts and the juxtaposition of the thought with God, the holy, or something sacred. Once the association is made, the interpretation of what they are feeling is identified as somehow sinful. Never sinful in a venial sense, but always in a mortal sense of sin, including the worst mortal sins of all, blasphemy and sacrilege. A third struggle is that details are not helpful for them. Details make the anxiety deeper and darker, and to participate in a system where devotion to details is required, or you have somehow failed, means that they are in a constant state of perceived failure. Since that failure is perceived as a failure to perform a sacred duty and obligation, that means they have somehow failed God. And when you fail God, Well, everyone knows that there's never a good result when that occurs. In the midst of all of this turmoil, I walked in with my little list of advice, trying to help a person sort out their sins, categorize them correctly, do the math, all the while effectively ignoring that no effort would be the least bit useful and helpful if I did not first deal with the anxiety. Second, I needed to confront the obvious fact that not all spiritual practices and disciplines are helpful at all times for all people. This realization was very difficult to accept. It seemed to go against every instinct that I possessed as a faithful Catholic, and even more as a priest. Third, I needed to introduce the men and women who struggle with the scrupulous disorder to a God and a church who did not demand the kind of perfection from them that seemed to be the minimum requirement, a rigid requirement that could not be adjusted in any manner. All the while battling with some people, some with good intentions, some with not good intentions, who would argue a different perspective because frankly they did not understand, even though they might believe that they do. Or worse yet, who do not care, and who are willing to take the collateral damage of a few sensitive souls in order to score theological points. I find any collateral damage unacceptable, especially damage that is inflicted on the most vulnerable among us. The battle to carve out a space for a good, orthodox, and pastoral response that is actually helpful for those who suffer with scrupulosity necessitated that I enter into an arena that I was uncomfortable in. Frankly, an arena that I feel I'm not really suited for. The arena of social media. To effectively reach the people who are the most harmed and as a result the most vulnerable to unhelpful pastoral practice required that I go to the place where people routinely looked for information that would be helpful in their struggle. That place was the place of social media. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and all the rest. And so here I am, reluctant to be here, but hopefully, despite my reluctance, I'm here with the necessary support that makes this kind of effort useful. I am determined to continue this for as long as I have something useful to say, not for my own pleasure or entertainment, but rather to be a real pastoral help for those who need it the most. Everything that is offered to you for managing scrupulosity is offered in the hope that it will move you away from the maintenance of your scrupulosity to the management of your scrupulosity. There is no other purpose or motivation in what we are doing here. Explore each of the videos that we offer. Know that still others are in production until we are able to offer the most comprehensive management response to scrupulosity that is possible. Explore spiritual direction and consider group spiritual direction. All of these efforts are intended to help you and to provide the best pastoral care that is possible. I pray and I hope that all of this will be of some help to each of you. God bless you.